Hi, this is Pat Johnson, your sociology instructor. In this mini lecture, we're going to talk about the concept of cultural universals. So, what's a cultural universal? Well, let's go back a little bit to our last discussion about culture shock and what culture is. If you remember, I started the discussion on culture shock by explaining a situation I experienced that was extremely disturbing to me because I was in a culture very different from what I was used to. Well, culture shock begs the question of, are there any cultural universals? What's a cultural universal? Our author tells us that a cultural universal is a value or behavior that is shared by all human cultures. So these are things that don't change from culture to culture, or at least in their general form don't change. Your author lists a few different cultural universals. Let's take a look at them. Communication is a cultural universal. All cultures have a grammatically complex language. If you're like me and you've ever tried to learn another language or two, you may realize how different languages can be. But all cultures do have language. They have a form of communication that has a grammar that is a way for people to convey meaning to each other. Another cultural universal is dependence on material objects. Now, the clip art that I used for this cultural universal might look a little bit more cluttered than what your value system is. Some of you may be minimalists or at least trying to downsize the amount of stuff that you have. Still, though, we all have stuff and we depend on that as humans. So all cultures have dependence on material objects, some just to a greater extent than others. Another cultural universal is marriage. All cultures have some type of marriage as a means to care for children. As we go through this course, we'll see that marriage can take many forms. Some marriages involve more than two people. Some involve, as in our country, only two people. But we'll see that all cultures have some form of marriage. Another cultural universal that our author lists is religious beliefs. All cultures have religious beliefs, some type of spiritual values. Again, these can differ greatly from culture to culture. Different cultures can also depend on religion or have more religious beliefs than other cultures, but all cultures have some type of religious belief within the population. Our author also lists property rights as a cultural universal. So we'll see when we look at different political systems that they can vary greatly as far as who owns the means of production in a society, but all societies, all cultures have some type of property rights. Another cultural universal is something called the incest taboo. The incest taboo is basically who you can or cannot have sex with, sexual intercourse within a culture. And what's interesting about the incest taboo is that in just about all cultures, it is considered taboo, in other words, extremely prohibited to have sex with your immediate family, your parents, your siblings, or your children. Beyond that, when we get to first cousins or second cousins, that does vary from culture to culture. But within that small immediate group, there is a cultural universal called the incest taboo. So again, in this module, in this chapter, we're going to look at how cultures differ from each other, But I want you to remember that there are some cultural universals that all cultures share.